Okay, so we're going to continue with our checkout process. So Brady found an issue. So if we shop when we're logged in and then we log out, we've now created another issue. So I'm logged in. Actually, not in this window. Hang on. Let's see what's going on. So I'm going to log in, put something in my cart. I'll put an item in the cart. So now so Brady, the scenario was you logged out and then went to cart, right? Okay, because it's trying to do the update. So we don't want to do this update. So we just, I think, need in our migrate cart, I think we just need to say, if user dot identity dot. So if they're not authenticated, we don't want to do anything. We just want to return. So don't do anything if they're not logged in, because it's trying to update their cart, which we don't want to update the items in the database. We want to leave them attached to that user's email address. So I think this should fix that error. I will try it one more time. But good catch on finding that problem. I do want to move on with the checkout process, so hopefully we can get to payment. So I'm going to log into the site right away, look at my cart, log out, go back to my cart. So when I log in, it should show me the 4 items that I've already put in the cart. And yes, there are other things we should do. We don't have the edit. So if I go to cart, should give me the items already in the database. There should be 4 products in my cart. And now if I log out and go back, still in my session because it's attached to the session. If I close the browser and come back, it'll be gone. If I want to carry on with my checkout process, if I go to checkout, it's going to make me log in. We've written the get, but we haven't handled the post. So if I fill out this form and submit, it doesn't go anywhere right now. There's nothing to process it. So we need to write a post handler at this same URL. So we've got our checkout get method here. Again, our post method's got to be private. We also have to specify that it uses the post method. And to prevent cross-site script domain scripting attacks, we want to validate the anti-forgery token. I think we talked about this a few weeks ago. So we'll create another checkout method, but with a different signature. So we're manually going to do what the scaffolding has done on the other create methods. If we go and look at our, for example, one of our other controllers we scaffolded. So here's our categories controller. Here's what the create post method looks like. We've got HTTP post, validate the entry forgery token, and then we are binding the inputs on the view to the properties of our category object. So we want to do the same thing. We want to bind the first name, last name, address, city, all those fields to the corresponding properties in the order model. But we haven't done this manually. So we call in brackets bind. And then we list the fields that we're binding. First name, last name, address, city, province, postal code, and phone. So we're binding those as one kind of array of parameters. So we're going to bind this list to an order object. We're going to make a new order object and populate it with these values. Whoops, sorry, there's no comment in here. It's one command. So we're binding each property into a new object. Now, we still have the three fields that were in our view that we took out. We have the order date, we have the user ID, and the total. So we're going to we said we are not letting the user enter them. We're going to figure those out programmatically. So our order date, we just use date time now. That'll timestamp current date and time. Our order dot user ID, we can use their email address from the user identity object. So we're going to attach their email address as the user ID. The order total we need to calculate. We need to go and get the items in their cart and perform some math to figure out how much is the total value of their order. So I'll create a local variable. And one of the cool things about our link query syntax is we can actually look up all the items in the cart, multiply the quantity times price for each item, and then sum those all as a running total in one command. We could do it in 3 commands, but we can do it in like a couple lines of code, a single command. Just let me make sure my syntax is good here. Okay, so we'll say from C in, I guess first we need to, first we need to get the items in there. So items equals. So we're going to get this user's oops, sorry. So this will give us the items in their cart. So we're going to select the quantity times the price. And in the same command, we can call sum. So this will do the line item price, and then afterwards, it'll sum them all up. So a more efficient way of, we don't have to loop through and calculate a running total. You can just do it all in one query. Get all the items, do math on each individual item, and then sum all those values together. That'll give us a single value, telling us how much the cart's worth. And then we'll populate our order objects with our now we have a bit of a trick. We have a bit of a task. We don't want to save the order at this point because customer hasn't paid for it. So there's no point saving this to the order table, generating an order number when we don't know if they have valid payment. So what we need to do is we need to store this order object in memory, take them off to the payment page, let them try to pay, and if the payment's successful, then we want to take this order and save it to the database, to the orders table. Here's the challenge. Normally we would use the session object for this. The session object, however, in .NET Core, it's lighter weight than the traditional session object. If I call set, this is all I have. I can set a string, I can set an integer value, or I can set an array of bytes. Whereas we want to save this whole order object in the session so we can move along and we can persist all these values. .NET Core doesn't support this. If we were using MVC5, we could stick an object in the session on one page, refer to it later, it all works. .NET Core, they've stripped this out. So what we need to do is we're going to add a little extension class that a developer wrote, and it will allow, basically what he does is he serializes an object to JSON. So we can store the JSON in the session, and then we can deserialize it out of JSON. So we're going to use his library to store this complex order object in the session, which we can't do on its own. It means basically serialize and deserialize basically means convert from one format to another and then undo. Yeah, basically. So I'm just going to save this here. I've put the link up on my core on D2L. I did put it, I know it's week 10, but I put it in the week 9 folder because this is the folder for our cart. So if you go into week 9, it's the last item. This link to a quick tutorial, store complex objects in a .NET Core session. So that'll take you here. So this tutorial is a year old, and it explains that our three options are set an int variable, set a string variable, or set an array of bytes. So this little library will convert to JSON and back out. So what we want to do is I'm going to copy this block of code here. Actually, I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to make a class called session extensions. So I'm going to copy that code and just in the root of my, I'll just put this in the root of my project. I'll right click my web project and I will add a class, which I'm going to call session extensions. So we can use this library to properly read and write our order object and read it from the session. So call it session extensions. And then I'm just going to overwrite the declaration here. It's a static class. And we need a few references here. So for the iSession interface to be recognized, we need to reference Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.HTTP. And for the JSON conversion, the serialize and deserialize object, we need to reference this library called Newtonsoft by by a developer. His last name was Newton. He created a company. So his JSON parser is kind of the default JSON parser used by .NET. It's not native, wasn't created by Microsoft. So I'll save that class and build. I'll try to build. It's okay. It says our checkout menu method doesn't return anything yet, so I can't build. That's okay. So I'm going to go back to the tutorial. So now we already have our order. So what we want to do is we want to call, he's got a method session, HTTP context.session.setObject. So we're going to use the session extensions class found online to store the order in a session variable. So now I have set object available. It finds the method that's in that static class. We'll call our session variable, we can just call it order, and we pass in our order object. And that library will basically convert it to JSON and convert it back out. So then we are going to return a redirect to action payment. It doesn't care. You can pass in, so here's his method, here's his set object. So it takes in the session, and it's just an object that we're passing in. There may be one more thing we need to do, actually. Let me just see. We may need to configure one more thing in order for this to work. In fact, I think we're going to. We'll try it. I think it's going to fail because I think there's one more configuration item we need to do in order to get this to work, but we will try it. So I'll build. If this works, we're going to get an error anyway because it's going to try calling a payment method. We don't have that method or view yet. So if it gets all the way to line 162 and doesn't crash here, that's good. If not, we'll have to do a little more configuration in order to be able to use the session in this way. I think we are going to need to do it, but we'll try it. So I'm logged in. I'll go back to my cart. So let's see. I'll go back to my cart. Which is, of course, super speedy. I'm going to check out. I'm going to complete the checkout form, click the next button. It's definitely going to error out. The question is where it errors out. So I'm going to check out here my very expensive order. So it tries to go to payment. Okay, good. So our session, it didn't crash on our session. It crashed when it tried to redirect to the payment page. So things are, I think, are working. So now we want to make a payment method in view, and then we can set up and configure Stripe to do our payments. Is that the lottery winning call right there?
I don't know. You said off section. Whatever that is.
So I'm going to set up a new method called payment. It's going to have the authorize annotation. It's a private page. So now we need to read that item. We need to read the order out of the session because we've got to show the amount we want to send. So we're going to call get object. Goes to what we did in the tutorial. What did I do wrong? Get them as var. I call paste that session. Oops, sorry, lowercase. We are going to return a view. I know I still got an error here. We'll fix it. So set object work here. Why doesn't get object work? So we're serializing it in set. So it wants a string. Does that not look like a string? By specifying the type arguments explicitly. Hang on, let me check my test project where I have this working. In my low ballers burner project. Let's see. Oh, I see. I have to cast it. Here, I need to specify the type. Thank you, Burner Project. So we need to not only fetch that object, deserialize it, but then we need to cast it back to an object of type order. So read the object back out of the session and cast it to its original type. So we're going to create a couple of variables here. When we send the payment to Stripe, the value we send actually has to be in cents. So we're going to take the total and multiply it by 100. So if the value is $99.99, when we call the Stripe API, payment API, we need to send in 9,999. So I'm going to now put these two things in the view bag. So view bag total. So we'll show the user this amount that they're paying. But in the form that we post to the Stripe API, we actually need to use the value in cents. So we can scaffold our payment page. And then we're going to have to start our Stripe configuration because right now there's no integration at all. You have to look in the docs. So I'm going to add a view called payment. We'll make this one empty because Stripe has a UI component that will basically get generated automatically. All we really need to show the user is the total. And then we'll grab the rest of the code that goes in there from Stripe. So I'll scaffold this. And we'll maybe just put on a order total. And we can use the view bag to display the total. And then we'll have a form that will pop open a Stripe payment window. We'll grab that code from the gateway. I'm just going to build and walk through the process up to here and make sure that when I get to my payment page, it's now showing me the same total as I saw on my cart page. That way we'll know that using the session to store our order is working. If that amount gets passed along as we go through the process. I'll go back to the cart. I don't need to put anything in it. There's already stuff in my cart. I'm logged in. I've got 4 items. I've got a cart totaling $500 and some odd dollars. Okay, so I'll go back to my cart. My item should still be here because I'm logged in. Haven't closed my browser. So $548.98 is my total. Click checkout. fill out my form quickly. So now my payment page shows what I owe. Good. Stripe will handle most of the rest of it. So we now need to go there. We need to create an account, free account, and set up API keys, which we then need to store in our app and read those. And we need to include those keys when we're making the call. I think the link is on in here in week 9. Yeah, so right here is the Stripe payment links. So the first one is dashboard.stripe.com/register. So you want to go here. It's free to sign up. I think they'll send you a verification email. I already have an account, so I'm just going to log in. Maybe just give me some indication when you're done this process. I won't move ahead until people are saying, yes, I'm signed up and I can get into the dashboard. Well, here's a suggestion. Password generator, or come up with an algorithm for a strong password that includes the name of the site you're registering for. That way you never have to remember the password, you just have to remember the algorithm. Right? So I have unique passwords on every site, and they're strong, but there's a pattern to them. Yes, that's probably true. Better than having the same password for everything.
To have a secure password, you just need to be really long. Then it will never be guessed. But having it to be weird characters, the computer doesn't care what the character is. It's brute forcing the thing. It's going to track all the characters.
Right. So the longer it is.
Yeah, the longer it is, it gets insanely difficult to do it. Well, that's why like rainbow tables and stuff for your Windows stuff, you'll only go to like what, 7 characters. After that, you just can't. Make it freaking 16 characters, and it could literally just be characters.
Well, just one, you should be able to get into the dashboard. Yes, you can do skip for now. So once you're in, the API keys will be, I think it will auto-generate a set of keys. I think we just go to developers. So once you're in, the second item from the bottom is developers, and there you've got API keys. And also there's a test data toggle, make sure that it's on. So by default, I think you're automatically in test mode until you activate the account, which is good. We can put through whatever transactions we want here. So there's a key. So it's got a publishable key and a secret key. So the publishable key, this gets embedded in the form that's going to go on our payment page. So it's publishable because if users view the page source, they can see that key. The secret key is only used on the server, so they don't see the secret key. So once we're in here, we're going to take these values. We could use the global key store. I'm just going to store them for today in the app settings.json, and we can read them out of app settings.json. So I'm going to open up my app settings. And in here, I'm going to create a section called Stripe. With two keys and values. So I've got a publishable key and I have a secret key. I think that's what Stripe, that's the terminology they use. Yeah, publishable and secret. So I'm going to copy these values from the Stripe dashboard. So the publishable one starts with PK_test. And my secret key value, I'll click reveal test token. You can just skip. I think there's an option to skip. So the secret key starts with SK. The publishable key starts with PK. So I'm just creating a Stripe section in app settings and setting up my two keys and values. Yes. That's how you, yes, you have two options for storing those kind of credentials. The recommended way is using the command line to store them in like the secret key vault. And then when you publish to Azure, you use the configuration variables to create them there as well. This will work. It's not really recommended. It's not as secure to put them in your application. It's better to store them outside, but this is an alternative that is functional. So make sure you add this section to app settings.json. And then we need to configure our startup file to read these values and pass this configuration to our controller. So I'll leave this up for a minute, and then we'll do the configuration we need to do. We need to do one thing, couple things in our startup file, and a couple things in our controller, so our controller can have access to these values. So I'm going to go to my startup.cs file. And this is going to be inside our configure services method. So here's what we're going to need to do. Read configuration from app settings. .json and make available to controllers through dependency injection. We'll talk a bit about more dependency injection. It's actually mentioned in one of the videos we watched this morning, if you recall. So in here, we're going to call services.add singleton, and we're passing in the iConfiguration interface. This will allow our controllers to have access to values, configuration values in app settings.json. By default, the controller can't read app settings.json directly. We've got to make it available. So our controllers have no direct access to site config values. So manually make these available. That's what we're doing here. So what we need to do is we now need to modify our shop controller. We need to use this technique called dependency injection. Anybody heard of dependency injection before? Have any idea what it is? You have to take a stab at it? Okay. Yep. Yeah, you're pretty close. Josh, were you going to add something? Right. So one object needs another object at runtime. So when we call the constructor of object A, we pass it an instance of object B. But the idea is this is generally dynamic, right? So here's the idea. I'll give you the idea. Let's say I say to you, work, and I hand you a hammer, right? What I hand you, if I give you a hammer, what are you going to do with it? Right, hit things. If I say work and I give you a saw, what are you going to do with it? Right, you'll cut things. So there's one method called work, but depending on what object is handed to that method will behave differently. So this is the idea of dependency injection. So our controller, we're saying if the shopping controller needs to be able to read values out of the configuration, we'll hand it an instance of our configuration interface when we instantiate it. So we'll take a break in a second. So we now need to configure the shop controller. In fact, our controllers already use dependency injection. It's already happening here, right? We have a constructor. What kind of object does our controller need when it gets instantiated? What's it getting right now? Right, our controller, in order to function, it has to have an instance of our DB context. So it's being injected here. When we scaffolded the controllers, the same thing happens. Our home controller, our original controller, this doesn't use the database. So there's no constructor, no dependency injection, because the home controller doesn't need anything to run. But the shop controller does. It needs the DB context. Well, now it also needs our configuration. So we're going to add configuration through dependency injection. So again, we'll have an instance of iConfiguration. And the naming convention typically, if you see an object that starts with an underscore, this typically means it's an object that's being received through dependency injection. That's kind of the standard. That's why our context is named with an underscore, so that you know this object's being injected. Yep, same reason. Exactly, right? The view is injected in a sense. So now, in our constructor, we not only need our DB context object, but we also need our configuration class. And we're missing a reference. Doesn't know, like I said, the controller has no knowledge of site configuration. That's in this namespace, Microsoft.extensions.configuration. So we need this reference in order for dependency injection to work. In a way, the simplest way to think of dependency injection, it's really not all that different from method parameters. Right? It's in an object signature. This is what I need to do my job. So I need that. I need these other objects at runtime. So in a method, it's for a particular function, right? To multiply two numbers, we need an x and a y integer passed in. So dependency injection is at the object level. This object needs these other objects. And those objects might determine how the main class behaves. This is not a .NET thing. We'll actually see this a lot in the JavaScript world, really common in Node and Angular and React, because they're object and component based. One component needs another component to work. So this has been here from the beginning. We just didn't really talk about it. So these are all of the dependencies when we call add identity. These are all of the dependencies of the identity object. Roles, users, etc. DB context. So now this will build. So there's our Stripe setup. Generate the keys, put them in our app settings, and then configure our controller to use the to read the configuration through dependency injection. It's 3, so let's take a pause. When we come back, we'll have to go through the Stripe documentation to see how do we generate the payment page. And then what code do we need to do in terms of processing that payment. But we should be able to finish that, I think, in the time we got left. So I will push back up to GitHub. Keep in mind, if you use my code, it has my API keys, not yours. So you may want to replace those.
Oh, yeah, the real one. No, yeah, the real one. Yeah, I was just I'm hoping that 1,000, and that's too much. I mean, the first 60 were good. So that's a good start. At my house. So the discovery mission is the one for doing what to everyone? ambitious. That's impossible. Like, how are you gonna have to pay on gas now? It's not gonna be for free.
There's like a primitive thing here.
Oh, okay. If this could work, it would go all the way north Canada and it's sick Wi-Fi. Yeah, I built some Wi-Fi. Great. That was my connection. Did you go the line or you go like satellite? Satellite. Satellite. Like, satellite. I was trying to like satellite. No, I'm pretty sure it's satellite. Like that, mine is limited 16 gigs per day. So I don't need. Yeah. I was gonna put a cut on, but I was like, I'll take it off the car anyway. See you next week, guys. See you next week, buddy. Remember the homework. Where's that guy? I don't know. Yep. How's it going? What? Yeah, that's. We could pull your out. Do it. Yeah. I don't really know. Yeah, I did. Leave the sound of it. That could have been. That could have been off the nasty. I didn't know when it was disaster. No. Well, I mean, I don't really care. I could not track it would work. Well, it would be a disaster. Yeah. I'm sure you would.
I'm paid to be here, so I'm going to teach. You guys are paying to be here. Whether you want to learn is up to you. I'm not offended. They're here most of the time. Driving to Niagara on a Friday rush hour wouldn't be my favorite thing to be doing. So I hope it's something worthwhile. Those are generally worthwhile.